This episode is brought to you by Bub's Naturals. Bub's Naturals is a tribute to former Navy SEAL Glenn Bub Darty, a national hero who laid down his life saving Americans in Benghazi, Libya. Glenn was a best friend to hundreds, people of all walks of life, from ski bums to outdoor enthusiasts, hippies, SEALs, fitness fanatics, and anyone and everyone in between. Glenn's call sign in the Navy was Bub. He stood for self-improvement and was always looking to help others, and that same DNA is woven into the Bubs brand. They donate 10% of all of their profits to charity in Glenn's honor, starting with the Glenn Darty Memorial Foundation. Now, we were lucky enough to have Bubs come in as a partner at our Power Monkey camp, and they were an absolute hit with all the coaches, campers, and staff. We were lucky enough to have a variety of their products to test out, from their collagen protein to their brew coffee, as well as their hydrate or die electrolytes. Now, I was an absolute fan of the Hydrate or Die. We are on our feet at camp, constantly teaching, training, learning, playing for an entire week, and I needed something to be able to get me through those days, and the Hydrate or Die was what allowed me to do so, all the way to that last pickleball game at the end of each night. And if you would like to try out some of their product, please be sure to head over to bubsnaturals.com and use the code POWERMONKEY, all one word, all caps, for 20% off. Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world of fitness about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host this week being Jordan Samuel, and we are speaking with Bo Sandoval. Bo is currently the Assistant Athletic Director at Texas A&M University, but he has had an incredible resume in the strength and conditioning world leading up to his current position. I was fortunate enough to work with Bo when he was a strength coach at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs during my years out there. He has since gone on to be the Assistant Director of Strength and Conditioning at the University of Michigan, as well as being the Director of Strength and Conditioning for the UFC. It was fantastic to catch up with Bo and also listen to him speak on something he is so incredibly passionate about. The wide variety of athletes he has worked with over the years give him such a unique perspective on what it means to train the individual. He gives insight into what he has done at the various institutions where he has worked with athletes ranging from all different sport backgrounds, from pentathlon to gymnastics to marathon to MMA and more. The needs of these athletes is all different, and Bo has a vision to help create specific systems so each of these athletes can succeed at the highest level. We also discuss some of his personal interests and how he likes to keep his competitive edge in his own daily life. We will definitely aim to have Bo back again in the future, but until then, enjoy the episode. All right, well, Bo, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Before we even get into it, I'm just noticing your background. Is that your office?
That's my office. Yep.
Are those Indian clubs, like antique Indian clubs in the back there?
I knew you were looking at
You know, I wish they were antique. They're not. They're a modern rendition, but yeah, they are.
I have a set of antique Indian clubs in my gym here in the house. Did you know that Indian clubs was a men's gymnastics event in the Olympics back in the day?
I had heard. I don't know any details of it, but that's where the wrestling community originally kind of got the idea from.
All right.
Was conversing with the gymnastics world. Indian wrestling culture has been around for several hundred years, mostly kind of revolutionizing Greco-Roman in sand pits and things like that. But yeah, that's where kind of they popularized wielding maces and clubs for wrestling performance. So yeah, that's at least where my knowledge extends to.
Love it. My college coach at Stanford, he was well versed in the history of the sport of gymnastics, and he would bring him in all the time and show me his routines from back in the day, from when he was competing, and it was just always a nice little tidbit about the sport of gymnastics having some influence in some other areas as well in the strength conditioning world.
Totally.
So we have a little bit of history. I want to just touch a little bit upon where I met you for the first time and get your take on what it was like to be part of the Olympic community before you've gone through so many iterations of, different roles within the fitness community and where you are now, which we'll get to. But you were one of the strength conditioning coaches at the USOC Training Center in Colorado Springs, USOPC now. What years were you there?
I was there from 06 to 09.
06, 09. So yeah, we overlapped. I ended up leaving right at the end of 08 after Beijing. And you worked with a lot of the athletes there. Would you say that you worked with any of the gymnasts while you were there?
I did work with a handful. Gymnastics, women's was always a transient sport. They had several locations where they held a lot of their national team camps, but we would see them on occasion for high performance training camps or any sort of consultation camps. Particularly, Dr. Bill Sands was there at the time, and he was still helping with generating a lot of annual and quadrennial planning with USA Gymnastics. And so we played a little role in just helping with those consultations and some of the strategizing around what went into those plans. And then things like rhythmic gymnastics was a resident sport at Lake Placid at the time. I'm not sure if they still are, but I had a few stints up there as well and got to interact with the gymnastics world up there. Little different flavor, some different philosophical ideals around what their criteria was being judged on, and what the demands of that genre of gymnastics required. And then I would say I saw a lot of our men a lot more frequently at the USOC in Colorado Springs. We did have a few that spent some long-term stints there, whether they were doing rehab cycles or they just chose to live in that area and train for an extended period of time. And lo and behold, we ended up, when I left in 09, I went to the University of Michigan, and I'm going to be, I'll probably get scolded for this. I cannot remember his name, but one of the assistant men's national team coaches went to be an assistant coach at the University of Michigan at the time. I cannot think of that gentleman's name, but anyhow, so some good brushings. Man, it was one of many athletic communities that influenced my outlook on sports, because it gave such a different look. When you look at the physicality of gymnastics, but some of the subjectiveness to the judging and the artistic sort of creativity that has to go in with it. It just gave some different perspectives to the preparatory process compared to, say, USA boxing or team sports like USA volleyball, or the ultra end of the power sports with USA weightlifting having their headquarters literally just adjacent to our S&C facility. So it was a great educational experience for me. I mean, I got to the USOC at 26 years old, and so pretty young in my career, and it was a great time to kind of just soak up so many different perspectives on what makes an elite athlete tick at the highest level. So yeah, I'm grateful for that time frame. And of course, I mean, there were greats, those that were exceptional, like yourself, walking around the halls daily, living a normal life, eating food, trying to relax during their downtime, trying to occupy themselves with their hobbies. But then when it was time to go after that ultimate endeavor that they were after, just an elite training mentality and devotion towards preparation. So it was a really cool place to kind of get immersed in.
I just had so many great years there. It is kind of a college of athletes. That's the way that we would think about it, being living on campus for that number of years and being able to, like you said, rub elbows with athletes at the highest level in so many different sports. From your perspective, who are the most impressive athletes? What sport really stood out to you as being like, holy shit, these guys are insane?
Yeah. Man, I can't really, so I've had this question a lot over the years, and it's really difficult for me to narrow down beyond three. And always having an appreciation for the influence of like team sport athletes. When you look at elite basketball players, elite football players, like it's pretty impressive how they can not only use their athleticism, but cultivate working relationships and rely on so many moving parts. But down to my bones for my whole career, I've just had the ultimate appreciation for the individual athlete there, where everything is on their back. There's no one else there to do it for them. You have to kind of just step up and do it all on your own. Now, you may be contributing to a team score, but ultimately, when it comes down to execution, it's you and what's going on in between your ears. And so, gymnastics, weightlifting, and the pilots for bobsled really, I would say, in fact, they fascinated me, and I would put them up there as some of the most interesting, but not just during competition, the daily operation, the minute by minute culmination of all their training and all their practice and all their worries and all their fears and all their accomplishments. Those three really hold a spot near and dear to my heart. I would throw diving in there with a close fourth. I helped generate some of the high performance planning with USA Diving leading into the 2012 games, and very similar in a lot of attributes. But man, those when I think of those sports, you're talking about a finite set of skills pushing to the ultimate limit, and ultimately it's your responsibility. It is only on you. No one can do it for you. No one can pick up your slack. It's just you and your implement or whatever it is your skill is. So I always had a great appreciation for that. If you ask me, like, who are the best athletes, individual sports jump to the front of my mind. And then when I think about the physicality of a gymnast, the physicality of a weightlifter, the physicality of a bobsled pilot, and those pilots, they got to push the sled just as hard as those elite push athletes. But then the focus once they get in the cockpit and their ability to make micro adjustments as this thing's flying down at like 90 miles an hour on a sheet of ice, which is one of the most dangerous events in the Olympics as well. But that one too, it jumps right in there with just that ultimate execution with a ton of physical training leading up to it.
It
So
sounds like
those would be my picks.
Sounds and a little bit of crazy too, I would think, to do that
A lot
bobsled.
a lot of crazy. I mean, look at Dave and these guys from the rings perspective. You got to have some crazy. You're inverted. You're on unstable implements.
Oh, Dave's definitely crazy. I spent a lot of time.
Right. You just gotta. I feel the same way about pole vaulters and downhill skiers and wakeboarders, and
I'm kind of surprised he didn't throw wrestling into that list at all, just because the mental side of it, but also the fact that it's you actually have to battle against another person, so you don't know
Yep.
what your next move is going to be. You've got to feed off the other guy.
Yeah, it's a hard when someone asks what's what's the one, man, it's tough. Wrestling's up there for me really high for a number of reasons. One, I mean, from a physical torture standpoint, it might be the worst sport out there. I mean, I worked with professional fighters for a long time, and they have to do a multitude of training, different genres of martial arts. And anytime we would see a congested training schedule and we would look to manipulate that schedule to open up some windows of recovery, we'd say, hey, if you were going to miss one of these sessions, what would be the one you miss? Every single time it's wrestling. Oh, I'll take wrestling off. I'll miss wrestling because it's the worst practice you're going to go to. It's the most grueling thing you're going to go to. A light day of wrestling is still the worst day of your life. So that I have an ultimate appreciation for that, for sure.
Well, that's another sport that was butted up against the strength and conditioning facility at the OTC. You had weightlifting on one side, and you had the wrestling room in the back. And the wrestlers are always a little crazy. Those are the guys that are a little bit. Those are the guys you always wanted to go and hang out with on the weekend because you knew you were safe.
You were
no
safe.
matter what happened. Yeah. We went out with the wrestlers, and we knew we were going to be okay that weekend.
Yep.
But you go and just peek your head in and watch the wrestler sessions. It was always nuts, man. Like what they were doing, being like, wow, like just watching each session, how intense and how just focused you need to be. It's one of those ones that I always appreciate at a really high level. And coming back to you, like you transitioned into working with not only wrestlers, but in mixed martial arts world for a number of years. What was that transition like, going from very, Olympic sport into something that was more combat based? Was that something that's pretty natural for you?
Well, it was exciting for a couple of ways. One, I felt prepared. I had some experience with not only some combative sports with wrestling, boxing, taekwondo, and judo, but weight classification sports that required, a type of physique to be efficient at the sport, not just to make weight. Yes, that's part. Some of these sports require that you have to make weight, but there's also an optimum. When you look at a libero in volleyball, like there's a body type for that makes them the type of animal that can root a ball out from the basement, no matter where it's at on the court. And like a coxswain on a crew team, like for them to be efficient, that boat needs to be light, and they don't have an oar in their hand. So there's a specific job and a specific type for that job. When you get into combative sports, it's not only weight classification, but it's also, there's a lot of efficiency that goes into that as well. And nowadays we're seeing like there's a lot of elites that when you look at their scale in terms of height and wingspan and things of those lines, they're big. But then when you look at overall body mass, they're light, and that can provide some elite advantages. and vice versa. You see some that are so short in stature, but dense and thick, and that can provide other advantages. Both, people could argue, could provide disadvantages. And this is where strategy and gameplay comes in, which makes everything a competition. And I'm fascinated by competition. So transitioning into combat sports, or getting into that genre of combat sport, mixed martial arts, I was pretty comfortable with weight classification sports. I was pretty comfortable with combative sports, dealing with the injuries that come along with it. And a lot of those sports, if you want to be offensive, you have to do damage, and someone's going to take that damage. So kind of learning to be agile and working around the micro and major injuries, dealing with things like concussion and assisting in the identification of concussion symptoms and things along those lines. What I was really excited about, knowing that I had some of the equipment to go into it, was we were kind of at the ground floor of it at an elite level. So the UFC had ultimately made a major investment in developing the UFC Performance Institute. So new facility, but more than just a facility, an entity, a set of assets and resources for their 700 some odd rostered fighters that were on their professional roster. And so this was a mainstream sport at the time. They were top 4 in the US for television revenue. And so they had just overtaken hockey, which is, that's a major couple 100-year-old sport in the US and over in Eastern Europe. And so knowing something that big to be on the ground floor of development for health and welfare for athletes, that's like a comet. It's not going to come around very often. And so I was really excited about that, being part of the crew that helped generate data, generate some trends and some findings around best preparatory practices for those types of athletes. And then just equipping professional athletes that, they're just like you. They're passionate about wanting to be competitive at the highest levels, and they don't have those resources. They don't have biomechanists taking a look at them. They don't have strength coaches working with them tailored to what they've got going on. They don't have dietitians specifically writing out routines and dietary insights for their not only health and well-being, but for their weight cutting metrics as well. So all these, physical therapists, massage therapy, all these things that would go into really giving an elite athlete the best chance of success, they didn't really have that. They could subcontract a lot of that stuff out, but I'm sure you're well aware how expensive that gets when you're coming out of pocket on it pretty quickly. So for the UFC to make an investment to say, hey, if you are a contracted fighter under our label, you'll have free access to this pretty much 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 52 weeks out of the year, was kind of an unprecedented thing. And we were really excited about it. So that got my juices flowing. I knew I had a massive, even though I was equipped, I had a massive learning curve in front of me. You got to kind of meet people where they're at. And so trying to understand where some of these fight teams, fight coaches, and fighters were coming from in terms of their needs analysis, us doing our own needs analysis, but also taking in what they're given. A lot of them have, they're 20, 25 years into the sport. They can provide a lot of insights and experiential knowledge on what it takes to be elite. So taking that in from both perspectives. And as much as we were a training facility, we were a research institute as well. So data accumulation is the name of the game. If you really want to study something and understand what it takes to win in a genre of sport, you've got to accumulate data. So not only physical and physiological data that we were getting in-house, but statistical analysis amongst the sport, how different weight classes were winning fights, and what those trends look like, just as much as some of the negative trends on where the most weight misses are occurring. When a fighter misses weight, not only does the fighter miss out on an opportunity to make revenue, the company misses out on an opportunity to make revenue. When a fighter misses due to an injury, not only does the fighter miss out on opportunities, the company misses out on opportunities. So it's a win-win for everyone to provide resources to improve the sustainability of the professional fighter in that particular league. That's kind of what our roles were tasked with, and that's what it looked like at a overarching level. And then if you dive down into the micro level, athletes just like yourself, the individual that's preparing for a specific bout in a specific weight class, whether it be an undercard fight at 15 minutes total or a title fighter main event at 25 minutes total, we start to formulate like what do we need to do to come up with a winning plan, winning ingredients to have that fighter ready for that particular bout. And then the struggle with that genre in particular, which became entertaining, but also a headache, is they don't really have a culture for 52 week planning and preparation. They get booked for a fight. They may have 6 to 12 weeks to prep for that fight. They're training, they're all in, they're doing everything they need to. Fight's over. They might train some martial arts here and there, but in terms of the dietary habits, the physical training habits, the recovery habits, it's culturally, they just throw that stuff out the window. And so really kind of building habits and teaching life skills on how to preserve themselves as human beings, not just get ready as a fighter, was a big part of what we spent our time on as well.
That was sort of kind of the question that I was going to ask was because you guys were brought in at the early stage and there was a lot of learning going on and data collection and so forth, were you getting a lot of pushback from the athletes when you'd say, hey, you should be doing this or you should be doing that, and they're just kind of telling like, hey, take a hike, I'm going to do what I do. How do you get past that? How do you get buy-in from these guys?
Well, a couple things. One, the buy-in definitely did not come in overnight. There's some skepticism there. This is a company that had at that time been in business for almost 20 years and had never really given that kind of resource to a fighter. So of course, at first, coaches and fighters are going to be a little skeptical on what it's about. So there was a lot of non-disclosure agreements that were thrown down early, and the fighters and coaches needed to understand that we were not an entity that was designed to take data and report it to our matchmakers or our upper executives so that they could jockey around with contracts. So that stuff was very exclusive to the PI. We worked for the UFC, but we were also a little bit separate from the business of the UFC because we're a fighter human resource. So there's a lot of confidentiality around what we did from a training perspective and injury recovery perspective that this did not get relayed to our executive team. So we had to establish that. We had to advertise that. We had to showcase that quite a bit because fighters with this new resource, they needed to understand that.
Was that confidentiality also between fighters? Like you couldn't tell another fighter what you were having this other fighter do?
100%, which makes everything ultra individualized. So rarely did you see a group of rostered fighters training together. If you did see that, it was because they were in different weight classes and they're on the same fight team. You would rarely see, a fighter from American Top Team training with a fighter from, Extreme Couture that are in the same weight class coming in and training together. They're going to see each other soon. They're probably going to have to fight each other. So just trying to keep, things. Look, we were there to disrupt the preparatory process of MMA and influence it in a positive way. We weren't there to disrupt the culture of fighting and make things weird, like looking your opponent in the eyeball as you're training every day. That's strange. That's not common with the fight culture. You wouldn't see that in boxing. You wouldn't see it in wrestling. You wouldn't see it in almost anything. So we wanted to try to preserve that as much as possible. In fact, a lot of our facilities were designed to be able to separate training corners. So, if we did have two fighters on site that were booked to fight each other, we were able to not only separate their MMA training, but separate their strength and conditioning training, their physical therapy and rehab and recovery sessions. And that was all due to the magnificent people in our operations department that handled all the booking, scheduling, and consultations that allowed us to be able to navigate some of that without putting fighters in an awkward position.
Is that facility still running strong? It seems like you basically from the ground up built an OTC for the MMA world. And obviously there's some interesting kinks that need to be worked out to make it work for that specific demographic. Is it still humming along? Is it still continuing to build after you've left?
It is. It's, from what I gather from my colleagues back there, they still routinely operate with anywhere between 80 and 85% of the roster globally year round. Some of that fluctuation or some of that lack of totality to the roster, it turns over a lot. There are guys and gals that are coming and going off the roster literally weekly, either getting cut or getting added. So there's some of that, but then a lot of them, once they become enlightened to the resources at the PI, they start to cultivate their own philosophy on how they want to use it. And that's what we would really try to encourage them is use it for what you need, use it for what fits into your style of training, into your daily operation. Some fighters already have some of these resources. And so we were simply a liaison to help kind of share best practices back and forth with others. We were their sole resource for a particular, whether it be recovery or dietetics or strength and conditioning. And so not only we were supplying information, we're supplying daily coaching and daily liaisonship with their coaching staff. Some of that being local, some of that being remote. We had to kind of dance back and forth in between. There were some fighters I'd literally see every day, twice a day. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there might be a fighter I'm working with in Poland that I might see once a quarter. So we had to get very good at not only remote consultation and things along those lines, but the mode in which we did it. So using, devices that would offer auto translation for some of our international fighters, having to get up at 3 a.m. to jump time zones to be able to consult with a fight team. Like, you just kind of have to be adaptable with some of that so you can keep delivering the correct message and the correct methodologies based on what we're trying to cook up. So it took a lot of work to kind of navigate some of that. Eventually, trial and theory becomes process and practice. And over time, it starts to turn into systems. As much as we generated systems, we also really tried to cultivate systems that were unique for what that fighter was trying to do. And it's a great sport to do that in, because all those fighters cut their teeth differently. Some of them come from a wrestling grappling background, and then they're learning striking secondary. Some are coming from a striking background. They're learning wrestling and grappling secondary. These kind of things start to dictate how their energy systems work. They start to dictate what their physical makeup looks like, which ultimately starts to steer us in a direction on how we plug gaps from a physical adaptation standpoint, or how we try to increase the robustness of strengths based on what their makeup is and where they kind of cut their teeth getting going in the sport. The interesting modernization of the sport, though, that we're starting to see, and we started to see it even from 2017 to 2021 while I was involved, you're starting to see more of a hybrid athlete from the onset. So you used to see a wrestler, learn how to strike and kickbox, and now they're a professional fighter. Now we've got 12 to 14-year-olds that are getting immersed in an MMA gym at the introduction of the sport. So they're learning how to wrestle, grapple, strike, submit, kickbox, the whole nine, right from Jump Street, which, as someone who accumulated a ton of skills over time, when you start to get to exposed to those skills early, you can become a lot more well-rounded, not only from a skills perspective, but from an energy system perspective, a muscular endurance perspective, a soft tissue development perspective. So we're starting to see these hybrid athletes come out through and through, and they are starting to shine because they weren't predominantly dominated by one genre of combat sport and then having to learn a set of skills. They're learning the whole pizza at once. Which is really cool to see.
We're seeing that now in the CrossFit space too. When CrossFit came out in 2006 or whatever, like, these guys were 25, 30 years old and they're getting into it and learning it all. And we're like, wow, this is incredible. But now these young athletes that are starting at like 11, they're blowing away the expectations of what we thought people could do in terms of endurance and strength and coupling it all together. I'm curious from your perspective, since you've worked with so many different types of sports, and I'd like to at some point get into the CrossFit side of things, but like, are there any guiding principles that stay consistent across all these different sports that you work with? Is there like a starting point that's always the same? I mean, it's got to be really difficult to navigate from your perspective, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, look, I like to think I use a lot of cooking analogies. I like to think of strength and conditioning like you're a chef. You got ingredients and then you got methods. And so really getting the right ingredients at the right time and using the correct methods based on the developmental model or developmental timeline of that particular athlete, that really determines whether or not your food tastes good or it tastes like shit. It really determines whether your food's going to be nutritious or your food is going to put someone in the grave early. So we're either deteriorating or we're growing, one of the two. So our ingredients and our processes really kind of dictate that, how fast it happens or doesn't happen. And so the two things that I find as a commonality when you look at MMA in particular, which is mixed martial arts, which also means mixed modalities, which also means mixed energy systems. It's very similar to CrossFit because CrossFit taught us a lot about not being so scared and petrified of interference. We used to think if you took this ultimate power athlete and you exposed them to too much volume, that they would become this type 1 endurance athlete, no longer capable of force expression, and vice versa. CrossFit taught us that no, you can have someone run a sub 6 minute mile and still deadlift 600 pounds, and they could do it in the same day, relatively minutes apart from each other. People are like, what? That doesn't make sense. You shouldn't be able to do that. Fighting taught us the same thing. Like, how could you get a wrestler, which is highly anaerobic, built on these 4 to 7 second scrambles of high intensity and heavy clinch work, which requires a lot of strength, and build the robustness of an endurance energy system where they can float around their feet nice and light and throw a 1-2 combination for 15 minutes at a time, like a boxer? Well, it's a hybridized approach to training, and it does require a level of education, of periodization concept, and knowing when to give and take based on what you're after. But that commonality that you asked about it's still the said principle: specific adaptation to impose demand. So it's just understanding that I can influence that much more acutely than I used to think I could. So it used to be, again, going back to the endurance coach, thinking like, man, if we lift them, they're going to get stiff and bulky and strong, but it's going to take away from their endurance. The interference is non-compatible. Whereas now it's much more acute. We've figured this out. I can microdose them with a certain thing to maintain that thing, and I can overdose another thing to exemplify it and to magnify it. And then I can give and take that back and forth throughout my annual plan to get the type of either well-roundedness or one-sided dominance that I need in one thing or another. And so really understanding that we can really tug and pull more like a puppeteer, much more than what we used to think that we could. The other thing is understanding a baseline of what you got in front of you. I think that's important, is doing not only a needs analysis, but a baseline of assessments to understand the physiology of the athlete. People think because you do zone 2 endurance work, your endurance is going to increase. Well, if you have an athlete sitting in front of you that sucks at metabolizing fat, it's not going to happen like you think it will. And so we actually discovered, in fighting in particular, there's a lot of fighters that, based on their diet, based on their geographic makeup, where they come from, they're metabolizing carbohydrate at an astounding rate at rest, sitting down in a chair. And so when you have an athlete like that and you start to expose them what would be an endurance endeavor, and they start metabolizing carbohydrate because that's what their body knows how to burn, that can start to affect how efficient they are with their aerobic systems, and vice versa. You get someone that is an aerobic animal that's very good at metabolizing or using oxygen for fuel and metabolizing fat, and they're a low carb or anti-carb kind of whether it was cultural or just misinformation or whatever the case may be, they'll struggle to metabolize carbohydrate at the right time during high intensity bouts of work. And so just as much as there's a prescription of physical work, there's also an integration of the dietetic necessities from a macronutrient standpoint to help, because a lot of fighters, they would have to go through we would call it metabolic rehab stage to get them to understand how to metabolize fat. So that when we actually did fasted cardio, they were tapping into fat stores to either help with the weight mitigation process or to assist in the building of the robustness of their aerobic system. So evaluation is the only way we would ever discover that. If I just said, hey, we need to build your endurance, let's do some zone 2 work and start getting after it, right? And then you get frustrated when you get a few weeks into this protocol and there's minimal to no results occurring. You start to do some gas analysis while they're training and take a look at them, and they're not metabolizing any fat while they're working. Their O2 respiratory exchange is showcasing that they're only predominantly metabolizing carbohydrate. That's problematic. That tells us, oh, okay, we only have one half of the equation. So the only way we would know that is through assessment. The same way with understanding someone's really strong, like you would expect, man, he must be really powerful. Well, if they have a really low rate of force development, that might tell us, hey, we might not need to work on peak force so much. We may need to spend more time on their quick twitch and their ability to be reactive. And we would know that being able to do assessments via force plates or other assessments along those lines. So assessment is key to understand. If you want to get at the root of it fast, especially with elite athletes that already have a baseline of work, a baseline of skill set, historical knowledge to what they're doing, you want to get right to the nitty gritty on what's going to positively affect their game, assessment is the way to go. We used to use the mantra around the PI, if you're not assessing, you're guessing. And you don't want to guess when it comes to someone's livelihood. So that was kind of our first stage, was assessment first. Now our battery of assessments were unique depending on the person. We had a standard battery that would just, someone coming through the door, we don't know them, we don't know anything about them, let's just get a good look at everything. And that is from movement screening to concussion screening, grip testing. We would look at neck integrity, joint integrity on all the critical areas, particularly that suited our injury audit for MMA. Hands, feet, shins, knees, hips. And then we would start getting into the physical side of force development, rate of force development. We did a 3-minute MAP looking at metabolic output and the rate of accumulation of lactate. We also did VO2 max assessments to be able to see what their aerobic threshold looked like, and then what those relationships between VT1 and VT2 would look like. So that'd be like a general scheme. Then when we started to get down the rabbit hole of specifics of what an athlete was trying to achieve or something that they knew they were trying to troubleshoot, we might get into some more finite diagnostics with our sports science team and our head of performance, Dr. Duncan French. And so we had a very catered assessment model based on specifics, or we had a very general assessment model based on, just getting started with a brand new athlete for the first time. I know it's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of what the starting point looked like.
No, it makes sense. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it from an integration standpoint, right? Again, just coming back to the way that the Olympic Training Center was originally set up. Now it's since changed, but you were in a room. You mentioned Dr. Bill Sands. He was a huge part of the gymnastics community for years, creating some of the most important scientific studies around what gymnasts and how that applies to just movement in general. But he was in a completely separate building, separate department. You have a mental sports psychologist department, was also in a separate building. Nutritionist, separate building. But integration of these things really is critical, right? And from your perspective, how closely do you need to work, and for that team to be on the same page for you to be able to develop a plan that makes sense? So you guys need to all work together and come up with something uniquely, as opposed to saying, hey, independently, my specialty supersedes yours. We'll figure out where yours fits in from here.
Yep. Ultimately, integration revolves around controllables. What are the things you can control the most first? For us, it was our team, our in-house team. The least controllable would be the exterior team. That's the fight coaches, the other support staff. In a fight team, you might have a head coach, you might have a striking coach, wrestling coach. You may have some of them have a breathing instructor. Some of them will have a dietitian that travels with them. Whatever their peripheral team was, those were sometimes uncontrollables for us. We tried our best to be able to involve them in the process and us stay involved with their process, but ultimately kind of an uncontrollable based on their willingness. What was a controllable was our team. And if you want to really promote integration, you need to put everyone right on top of each other. So by design, one of the brilliant things I loved about coming on to the UFC, all of our office space was in the same room. So literally our director of strength and conditioning was sitting next to our director of sports science, sitting next to our director of physical therapy, sitting next to our director of sports dietetics. So we were all in the same room. Now, as much as people might get irritated, because if I need to take a private call, I got to go into a conference room somewhere. The daily minute by minute conversations that happened in that room around all of these various thousands of cases of fighters that we were working with, it was amazing. It was amazing. And that it worked so well because we were literally up each other's butts all day long. Even in our workspaces, the design of the facility, the strength and conditioning room shared a wall of windows into the physical therapy clinic, which shared a wall of windows into the hypoxic chamber, which shared a wall into the sports science laboratory. So everything human performance was on the ground floor. The dietitians, the locker rooms. If an athlete stepped outside of the locker room, they were roughly 50 feet from any resource that they needed. Anything MMA or fight related was upstairs. So one staircase up, and you had wrestling mats, boxing rings, full-size octagons for competition simulation, bags, speed bags, everything that they would need for that. And so trying to tie things in where you got limited logistics for the athlete and their team, and you have optimum integration in terms of conversation and harmony amongst the performance staff at all times. When you enter the PI, there's a reception area where the operations staff is kind of headquartered at. And that operations staff is kind of the heartbeat, again, at tying us all in. I'm a strength coach. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I've got a set of skills and I've got a set of priorities. And it's important that my priorities marry into all these other things. But in order to get your most out of me, I got to be well coordinated. Someone's got to have a leash on me, kind of lead me around the right direction. Our operations staff was paramount to that. And I would say the same for all of our different departments. So in order for integration to work, that's step one by design. Then personalities. You'll hear the best companies, best leagues, best teams in the world say that the church is not the building, the church is the people. And so having people that are like-minded enough but diverse, skilled enough to be able to bring a different ingredient to the pot was key. And this team, much like the team I joined at the USOC in 2006, did a ton of homework trying to provide or trying to fulfill positions with personnel that were diverse in their skill sets, competent in their skill sets, but also willing and yearning to want to be a part of a greater team. That was paramount amongst the recruiting process. I will say over the development of our staff across the next 5 years from when we started, we definitely made some errors in recruitment, and those, we had to correct those over time. Where we had some great intellect, we recruited some great intellect and great strategy, just wasn't the right fit to be able to weave their way into what the fight community would need. So it's tricky, and I would say it is for any sport genre. But the people is where the magic's at. You get that right, you have a great shot of ultimate integration and getting all these resources right where an athlete needs them.
What an incredible place to be from the ground up. I mean, to see the thought process that goes in to be able to create a room with all those great minds all in one place to be able to help out the athletes is incredible. Now, you've transitioned into being able to use your skill set into the NCAA world, from Michigan, now at Texas A&M. When I was fortunate enough to be at the Northeast Coaching Summit that Jason Leiden over at CrossFit Milford did a couple of months back, and you were there lecturing, and we sat down a little bit, and you were talking about how amazing Texas A&M is in terms of their ability to help out the athlete. And maybe even in comparison to what you saw at Michigan, which is also a powerhouse school, maybe same budgets, more sports resource being allocated at a school like Michigan. Talked about it at Stanford too, where we have so many sports, resources being kind of, spread thinner than at a school like Texas A&M. Are you able to produce similar types of integration at a school like Texas A&M, or do you come in and processes are already set and then you have to change the way that you work according to what's already in place?
Yeah, those are amongst the biggest needles that personally that I want to move here. My whole career, I've heard that you can't do high performance in college athletics. It doesn't work. It doesn't
Why
work.
though?
And here's
Why?
all the reasons. A big one is there are a lot of distractions in college athletics. The academic piece is massive. I get scolded a lot for saying this, but it's like the worst recipe you could cook up. Someone saying, hey, we're going to take this ultimate academic endeavor that's going to take you 4 to 6 years, and we're going to match it with the most competitive arena that you've ever been in your genre of sport, and have you take both on at the same time. And it's an 18 to 22-year-old kid. I've just flabbergasted that we thought that was a good idea, but it is what it is. It's a monster industry. I truly believe that no one has perfected it yet. And that was the big attraction to a place like A&M. And I do believe there's a couple others in that caliber that have a good foundation of people, principles, and resources to be able to produce something similar to like what we produced at the UFC or what we had started to formulate at the USOC. Whether they do it on accident or do it on purpose, scaling is everything. So when you look at something like a Michigan, yes, that's a big revenue generating monster. But with 32 programs to support, the scaling just isn't quite right in my eyes. It doesn't make sense. They're never going to hire. I mean, if you compare that to what we have at A&M, they would need to hire another 10 strength and conditioning coaches across those 32 sports on top of the 9 that they currently have to equate to what we have here with our 16 sports. And that's just not going to happen. It doesn't exist. And that's one example. We're talking about one strength and conditioning, one avenue. You look in physical therapy or sports med, and then you get into psychology and these other, some of them even get more exploited in terms of the lack of resource or the lack of the ability to be able to supply that resource. So scaling is a big part, and scaling was a big part that kind of nudged me into saying, hey, you should go try this here. I've always had an itch to scratch when it comes to college administration. I've always thought when you look at some of those programs that are really successful, it was a couple reasons, could be a couple reasons why. Some, it was just a bolt of lightning. They got lucky, the lightning struck, they won a national championship in a particular sport, and they haven't repeated it since. You look at some of these universities where in a particular sport or group of sports, they consistently win championships over and over again. I think it's important to reflect and understand, how are they doing that? Why are they doing that? There's something there that is giving them the ability to do it. I think it's important to learn from those. But ultimately, I equate a lot of things down to strategy. When you look at a lot of those sports that win over long-term periods of time, they have strategies in place, great strategies, and they are not shy about fluctuating, evaluating, and even manipulating those strategies, not just year by year, but month by month and week by week. Those are true tacticians. Those are strategists that are really compelled to win all year round, not just during championship season. And so I truly believe a place like this, and there are a few others that have this kind of combination of scale and resource that just haven't mastered strategy yet. And I thought, man, if I could get over there, and I already recognized there were some incredible people that were here. I also knew that they had kind of a chip on their shoulder of wanting to recruit some better people in some other areas. And I just thought, man, I think I could contribute to that. And what a cool thing to be able to establish something in college athletics to say, yes, we can formulate a highly integrated, highly innovative, and driven performance team to truly support student athletes, which every athletics department in the country will say, we have an athlete-centered model. Well, then when you look at their behavioral functionality every week, it's far from athlete-centered. It's usually revenue-centered. It's usually university academic-centered. It's, many other things other than athlete-centered. And I think in order to have that, kind of what we talked about before with true integration, to be athlete-centered, you've got to have the right people. You've got to have them designed and systematically set up to where they can cultivate all of their resources and knowledge around that athlete on a daily basis. And the other unique challenge is, again, I think, is the age category. They're going through so many learning curves, academically, life, learning how to pay bills, balance a checkbook, fill their car up with gas, do their laundry, cook their own meal, all these things that people were doing for them before. Now you got to do all that on top of learning how to train and learning how to eat like an athlete and sleep like an athlete and compete like an athlete. That's a lot. It's overwhelming. And so the support necessity is there. It needs to be there. And I really think that we have an opportunity over the next few years to cultivate a unique place and a unique system to deliver that without any qualms. I would want to say, the ultimate sort of review would be for every graduating class or every athlete that exit these doors to be able to look back and go, man, I don't know that I could have had it better. I don't know that I could have had a better opportunity to compete well. So that's the ambition. That's the goal. Some of it probably unreachable, but a lot of it, man, we're going to try to move the needle as much as we possibly can.
There's a weird question here, and I don't even know if you have a response to it, but the NIL stuff has impacted the landscape of NCAA considerably, especially, and it's going to continue to do that, especially with high profile baseball, basketball, football athletes, the ones that are in the limelight. Caleb Williamses, Drake Mays, the ones that are, first draft NFL guys that are, dictating whether or not they can go to the NFL because they can spend another year in college and make just as much as they would if they went professional. Are you seeing that impact the way that athletes are navigating being a student athlete these days, A&M seems like it would be a situation where, dollars are being thrown around at athletes quite a bit. Just kind of curious if the NIL stuff has impacted the way that you view what you can do for an athlete.
I think it's impacted athletics, whether that's positive or negative. I think it kind of tips both ends of the scale. I hear a lot of complaints from coaches. The recruiting struggle only gets harder with it, and I think that's because of its infancy. I think as they kind of groove and start to understand how it works, that it could be weaponized if they want to, if they're smart about it. I personally, and I get a lot of hate on this too, I like the, not necessarily NIL, but the transfer portal. This is what I hear the most complaints about. My perspective is what an ultimate litmus test on whether you can truly impact an athlete, get an athlete to believe in what you're preaching, teaching, and sharing with them. And the only way to do that is you got to stay at the forefront of your job. You have to be well-educated, continuing to educate yourself, surrounding yourself, exposing yourself to those that are well-educated, and putting yourself out there and being left up to debate and being left up to criticism. I love that. I personally, I think, because athletes for years have been able to read through bullshit. The only difference is most of the time they never had the ability to do anything about it. Now, unpenalized, a kid can just jump in the transfer portal and go find what they seem to believe is a better recipe, a better fit for them. And so my challenge to coaches is, well, without being a car salesman, how do you upskill yourself and how do you empower your staff and everything around you to where it would be convincing enough to where, why would a kid want to leave? Why would they want to try to find something else when they have everything in front of them, convincing them that they've got everything in front of them, but then also following through with that once you've convinced them. Because I do think coaches are good recruiters. Recruiting is just getting the kid in the door. Retention is, that's where you got to put your money where your mouth is. Your methods have to live up to all that shit you talk during the recruiting process. And I think a lot of coaches fall short. So my goal, my ambition would be, I hope that it raises the standard for coaches and practitioners, instructors. That's ultimately, your D-line coach, man, you're an instructor. You're supposed to take the most cutting edge skills on how to divert and shift your weight to get around the biggest lineman on planet Earth so that you can go and touch the quarterback. That's what I'm studying all day, every day. I'm trying to understand what are the best strategies and tactics to be able to do that. And now athletes have the ability to say, are you doing that? If you're not, I don't feel like I'm in the best spot. I'm going to go look somewhere else. So I see that part as a positive. I do believe too, it's causing coaches and even practitioners to have to put a greater emphasis on the personal touch earlier on. You've got to be good at looking someone in the eyeballs and connecting. Sometimes you might get 30 seconds to do it. Sometimes you might get 3 months. That's great. But you've got to be able to connect with a level to show your worth. Everybody's like, for years we beat to death that, if you show them how much they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, that whole thing. That's kind of reversed now. They don't give a shit how much you care if they don't, that you don't know what you're talking about. So that is extremely important. You've got to be ultimately competent in what you do. And then, yes, there is going to be opportunities to be able to show empathy and to be able to build more of a nurturing relationship where it starts to get a little bit more advice driven and things along those lines. But ultimately, they're only coming to you because of what your skill set is. So they're only coming to me because someone said, hey, this is the strength and conditioning department. This is where we go to work on our physicality. That's why they came, not to say, Bo's got a cool beard, I want to get to know him and be his friend. That's not why they're here. Yeah. The same with that sport coach. They came because they heard, hey, that's the best offensive coach in the country. I want to learn offense from that coach. Well, if you can't live up to that hype once they're there, they're going to go find someone that can. So I love that it drives that competitiveness from a practitioner standpoint, an educator standpoint. But there are definitely some negative sides to it. We have an entitled generation that wants results really fast. And sometimes their ability to just see greener grass on the darkest landscapes, they can just create it. Now, you know what? I just think that's better. I'm going to go over there.
Right.
So the pond hopping sometimes is untargeted and unstrategized on the athlete's side of things. So we got our work cut out for us, educating them on what responsible looks like, and also educating them on, look, man, you're building your resume. The resumes don't look great when you bounce every 6 months. And so that's an important piece so that they don't set themselves up for failure. Sometimes those moves are totally necessary. It's a good fit for everyone.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think they're uncalculated and they can actually set an athlete back from achieving some of the goals that they want to.
I think it's such a critical piece. And Jordan, I'll let you jump in here. I just want to make a last comment. I think what you mentioned there is really important to us with Power Monkey too, just the relationships that you build with people and the competency that goes along with it, right? Saying, I'm coming here because I'm working with the best of the best. They care about not only the athlete that's in front of them, but also their specialty. Bo wants to be the best strength conditioning coach he possibly be to provide that for the athlete that he's working with. And so athletes recognize that passion for what you're doing as a professional, but also the passion then translates into the relationship with the athlete. I will say, though, that the pushback on this idea of what you're mentioning is not just the grass is always greener, but the actual green that comes along with it. Because,
Yep.
going into the portal, I think Matt Roll from Nebraska recently was talking about the amount of money that it costs for a school to be able to actually pay the athlete to come to another university. It's like upwards of $1.5 million to $2 million now that these athletes are able to get to transfer to another school. So there is definitely a monetization that's come along with transfer that I definitely think is a component in there that you kind of have to factor in.
When you get into this, like these Power 5 programs like this, I mean, we're competing with the SEC, we're competing with the other Power 5s, the Michigans, the Texases, the Ohio States, and that's the caliber that we're dealing with, and they all have that NIL
Deep pockets, yep.
And that is it is a real thing. What is totally just blows my mind is the willingness from some of these donors and some of these entrepreneurs or companies that they want to be a part of it. And I see that to be a little bit of a positive side as well. You're drawing people in that maybe didn't used to be as invested in collegiate athletics. It can be a double-edged sword for sure. But you're right. As a 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, the ability to monetize their skills and their likeness it's up there. So if you're good, you can't just be good. You got to be strategic and responsible, but you can definitely retire a lot younger than what you used to be able to.
For sure. Jordan, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated with this because I don't really follow a lot of the NCAA stuff, but
I don't blame you, man. It's stressful.
your point about connecting with the athletes and also making sure that you're displaying that the proof is in the pudding, like you're constantly upping your knowledge base. When I look at your Instagram, you're seemingly doing a lot of the training yourself in the gym, and I'm curious to know if you're making sure that you're in the gym doing the things that you're asking these guys to do so that you can show them that, like, hey, I'm not just dictating to you. And then to a further extent, was that the reason why you got into training jiu-jitsu when you were you at the UFC first and then you started training jiu-jitsu, or were you doing jiu-jitsu first and that then just so happened that you ended up being at the UFC?
Yeah, I started my jiu-jitsu journey when I was a senior in college. And that I got drug in, that could be a whole nother conversation. I got drug into that by one of my former mentors, and it just so happened to serve me well later on in my career. And then I continued on with doing it on and off over the last like 18 years. But the training part, like in my own training, that's just part of the investigative nature of me. Like constantly, I'm skeptical by nature. When I read something, whether if it is a peer-reviewed research paper, I'm going to go and try it. I want to see not only physically is it doing what they said that it would do, but what's the mental side look like? What is the fortitude needed to be able to do that? And then to be able to replicate skills with the type of efficacy that's going to transfer into some competitive nature. Like, how do you maintain that going through certain levels of exhaustion or certain levels of frequency? I always want to explore and know that gives me expectations. So then when I have someone execute that, now I have an expectation of what does okay look like? What does elite look like? What does unacceptable look like? Because I'm a big fan of executional accuracy versus arbitrary completion. I think there are far too many elite athletes that exercise versus train. And the difference is in accurate execution versus arbitrary completion. Oh, I did 10. I must be good. It's in the tank. 10 well executed versus 10 just at no required intensity, no required speed, no required efficacy. That's gen pop. That's someone just wanting to be busy and exercise their demons a little bit, but you're not competing. You're not going towards a competitive endeavor. And so I want to know, like, is that even achievable with what I'm prescribing? Is that, is it going to translate that way? Can we supply a certain level of martial intent into what we're doing? The same type of martial intent. When you see a pitcher throwing a bullpen, they're not just casually picking a ball. You ready to catch it, man? All right, good. There's a whole preparatory process into how they get situated, how they wind up, how they go through. I mean, every millimeter is calculated. Why is it not like that with a barbell every single time? It turns into this arbitrary completed task versus executing a thing that's going to contribute to my muscularity, to my musculoskeletal system, to my energy systems. And so I'm always trying to see, like, as we implement things and introduce new things, there's got to be an executional standard involved if I'm going to really expect some ultimate gain out of it or improvement out of it.
Better is better. Tired is easy. I saw that on your Instagram.
I love it, man. Better is better. That is about the simplest way to put it. And, the idea too that just exhausted is going to equate into some dismantling of an opponent. I used to go through I would beat my head up against the wall with fighters all the time. Like, man, you just can't be a maniac and go berserko with no technicality. You need to be a surgeon or you will get exploited quick. And I don't know how many examples we could show, a couple hundred on YouTube right now, of fighters in elite categories, top 5% in their weight class, get ultimately exploited because technically they're less savvy than the adversary that they're facing. And that's sad because, when you see someone that has the physical and even some of the skill potential, but they just don't have the composure and the mantra of executional excellency, that's a difference between elite and pretty good.
I think it just fits in so well with, like, just the way that we teach too, like the emphasis on moving well and technical proficiency and slowing things down, especially in the world that we work in within CrossFit, where, intensity ends up, for whatever reason, superseding the mechanic side and the slowing things down. Yep. It's resonating what you're talking about really well with the way that we teach and the way that we're trying to get to that population in the same way, like, slow things down. Let's see if you can move well before
I think with sports like that, everything, as soon as something becomes a race, execution can be one of the things that get sacrificed first. When you look at elite track and field, those are the fastest people in the world. And then you watch them run and it's beautiful. I mean, it is like the sequence of movements that is efficient. I mean, it's beautiful. When you look how they train, they do exactly what you just said. They break down all those components, some at a very slow rate, some they overload, some they underload and overspeed. They're constantly tinkering with all the components so that the big culmination of things looks like it does on race day. And I would think the same approach with a CrossFitter. If you want to link all these different skills up together, isolate those skills, master those skills, isolate those energy systems, master those energy systems, then intentionally, like a puppeteer, start to muddle those energy systems up together, muddle those skills together in the preparatory process leading into a competition. And when I think the general population that goes to a CrossFit gym, I think sometimes there's a disconnect on what that looks like. They watch their favorite CrossFitter and like, I want to train just like them. They don't have an appreciation for how much prerequisite skill development went into why they look like that. And they can do it at that rate and they can do it that fat and that many. And they just want to kind of dive into it. Like, well,
we actually
learn how to handstand first.
We had Pat Vellner on the other week. He's second fittest man in the world this year and won the Rogue Invitational. And he was saying, I think people would be really surprised to learn how little, quote, CrossFit the top guys really do on a daily basis. It's mostly strength work, accessory work. And yeah, maybe I'll throw in a Metcon here and there, but But you're right. When you go to a CrossFit gym, there's no delineation between CrossFit the methodology and CrossFit the sport. And so
Mm.
everybody's in there racing everybody, and they're, you know, not all the time, but you see situations where form's breaking down and these sorts of things in the as a trade-off for intensity, and that can catch up
Th-
to you.
This is my last question, just building off of that. And you mentioned it early, and I'm curious because I think what people gravitate towards there is competition, and they like to compete. And you mentioned this earlier that you're a huge fan of competition. Maybe in your personal life, whether that's with jujitsu, or I think you do a lot of bow hunting, and you do other things that allow you to compete. Is that something that you find to be important in this process, like the end result? Like we're training for something. The competition side is something that we have to strive for this to actually make sense.
If you look if you look at it the right way, competition can be the ultimate learning tool. And I truly believe that the fountain of youth is learning new skills. I think if you want to live to be 110, continually learning, continually challenging your tissue and your body, that's the fountain of youth. And so competition is an easy one if you use it the right way. If you can reflect on your losses and reflect on your shortcomings, competition can be a major driver of education and growth. And not just always physical competitions, mental competitions, academic competitions. There's a lot of things that you can immerse yourself in. Because you think about the things that are the excuses that people come up with on why they don't do something. Oh, I'm too old, or I don't have enough time, or I'm in debt, or I'm this, I'm that. Whatever the prerequisite scenario is. Well, there's a strategy for all of that. And if you really want to learn and extend yourself, master a strategy. That to me, if you want to learn how to play the violin, go get one, start playing, start taking lessons, like start building a strategy so then you can go and actually play a song. So that to me is at my age and where I'm at in life, being a dad and all those kind of things, competition in some very minor ones in my life. I'm not going to any major competitions, but it just keeps me on a learning curve. And I think that learning curve is a true fountain of youth.
I love that, man. Always learning, always trying to learn new skills. That's where our whole world is skill development. So I really
Yep.
appreciate that.
I mean, I can speak for myself. A lot of my sanity during COVID, when the shutdown happened, I'm a pretty social butterfly, but being at home all day and not going anywhere, and I was kind of going nuts. My saving grace was I had all these things I want to learn. I taught myself how to play the harmonica. I taught myself how to play the banjo. Started making my own arrows, which I'd never done that before. So, I truly believe if you can occupy yourself with a learning curve, you can go a long way. That's how people survive when they go and live in the middle of nowhere by themselves in solitude. It's the same way that people die in prison, because solitude is one of the greatest tortures that are out there, but you can weaponize it just as much as it is a torture device.
That's true. I'm curious, are you still playing the banjo?
I haven't played in a long time. I honestly,
Did you have
every
like all
now
the
and then
little claws and everything?
I do. Yep. I
Yeah.
got the picks. My wife actually ordered me a set of picks,
Nice.
and yeah, man, I used to sit on the back porch and got to where I could play 2 or 3 songs from front to back. There was a gentleman online he had a YouTube channel. I started following his beginner lessons, and then I actually reached out to the guy and told him like, "Hey, I'm stuck at home. I'm practicing this thing." And we actually got on a call and did a couple lessons together, which was really cool. He did not have to do that. But yeah, it was fun. I had another buddy out in New York who actually picked up the mandolin during the same time and taught himself how to play the mandolin, which was way cooler than my banjo.
I
But
don't know about that. It's cool, but I mean, come on. It's really small. It's got to be hard to play. The neck is so little.
the neck is little, and now I don't have a guitar background, so a lot of my guitar buddies kind of had that perspective, like, man, it's so weird, And for me, it was the first exposure to a stringed instrument, so it wasn't as weird to me.
That's awesome. You should keep it going, man.
Yeah. So maybe you might be my motivation to go pick it back up. It's been a minute.
Hey, if you want to get on a call, I'll play the guitar. You play the banjo. We'll just keep you moving.
I say you come out to camp, you have a little concert. You can do a little display for everybody at our Monkey Camp.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for the time today, man. We got a couple last minute questions, some quick ones if you're up for it.
Yep. Rock and roll.
What sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Weightlifting.
Damn it, that was way too quick, man. Come on.
My wife was a weightlifter. I competed. I coached weightlifting for about 11 years. So
Understood.
He
Understood.
left gymnastics off of his bio on LinkedIn, so
Yeah,
he
come
coached
on.
it.
We got to at least put that in. You put acrobatic sports and you didn't put
Yep.
gymnastics. That's
Yep.
it.
You know, people get sensitive about it too, though. They're like, well, tell me what gymnast you coached. I'm like, look, man, I was a liaison for a few, supported them, loved them, but give me a break. Give me a break.
Um, what if you have a guest that you think would be great for us to have on the podcast? Anybody you've come across recently? Somebody you think would be a good interview for us?
Ooh, one of my recent favorite people. I've had a couple of brief conversations with him. I've read both of his books now. Is Michael Easter. He is a journalism professor at UNLV currently, and his first book was called The Comfort Crisis.
Great book.
And then he wrote a second book, Scarcity Brain, and heavy psychology, but a lot of physicality mixed in between, a lot of evolution of the human thought process and how we deal with nurturing ourselves, whether it be a cell phone or physical training. Where are a lot of our dietary habits, how we deal with death, how we deal with life, those kind of things. Very interesting person. He's found his way in the human performance world in several different genres, particularly on the mental aspect and on some of just the daily habits of people. He's an interesting dude. I think you would really enjoy conversations with him, and he's just really easy to talk to. But he'd be one for sure.
That's awesome. That's perfect. I mean, if we could
Yeah.
potentially set that up, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm
Yep.
very interested
Yep.
in his new book. I've read the Comfort Crisis. I haven't read Scarcity Brain yet, but I'm definitely interested. So
Yeah.
That probably answers the last question.
yeah,
A book that you'd recommend. I think we just add Scarcity Brain to the list here. If
Scarcity Brain's a good one. I got one more for you. Let me make sure I get the title right. Just recent here. Pull up my library. Do you like now this is more for my fiction people. Do you like thrillers, like investigative type of things?
sure.
So the only reason I got this book was because this guy's one of my favorite outdoorsmen. He's a backcountry bow hunter, all kind of hunter actually, Jim Shockey, and he's never written a book before. So he's written millions of articles and all kinds of how-tos and DIYs and stuff on backcountry hunting and things like that. So that's what I thought I was getting. The book is called Call Me Hunter. And thought I was getting a book on him developing his skills over the last 60 years as one of the best outdoorsmen that exists. I was wrong. This dude is a creative mastermind with building this drama of a book. So it was a cool surprise. If you look at like the Jack Carr books or the Reacher books or anything along that, it's kind of along that genre, but it dives heavy into the corrupted world of fine art and conspiracies around fine art. And his historical fact checking is amazing. Like he takes so many facts and contextualizes it into his fiction novel. It was an awesome surprise. It's not that long of a read, but it's called Call Me Hunter by Jim Shockey. It's a cool one for all you fiction lovers out there.
That sounds awesome. I'm going to check that one out for sure.
Man, I told my wife, it like slapped me in the face. I thought I was getting this hunting book on backwoods bow hunting, and it wasn't anywhere close to that.
Amazing. Well, thanks for the suggestions, man. We'll definitely add that to the list. Bo, thanks for the time today. Where can people find you if they want to follow up with all the great things you got going on?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, bo.sandoval. You can always hit me up on there. I mean, I post family stuff and hunting trips and some training and a little bit of everything. I know some people get bored looking at people's family and stuff. So sorry, it's not like a Bo's company outlet or anything like that. But if you message me, I'm really good at getting back to people. Sometimes I'm a little slow, but I usually never leave anyone hanging. I'm pretty passionate about that. And then you can also find me on Twitter. I'm not quite as active, but it's Oly Strength, OLY Strength. But yeah, shoot me a message. I'm always willing to talk shop. Again, I'm on this learning curve all the time, so don't hesitate to reach out. And I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate you guys. Enjoyed my time at the Northeast Coaches Summit and listening to some of you guys kind of pitch your passion. Those to me, those are the best pockets of learning that exist. Those tight, quaint, I think we had maybe 40 people there total.
Yep.
And it was an amazing experience. So thanks for sharing there. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate you guys.
Of course, Bo. Hopefully we can meet up sometime again soon.
Definitely.
We'd love to have you out at a Power Monkey campus sometime in the future. You know, Texas is not far from Tennessee. Maybe we can get you out at one in the near future.
Man, that would be amazing.
We'd love it. For all listeners out there, please be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for upcoming services and events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Jordan Samuel Photo. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your hosts. I'm Dave Durante with my co-host Jordan Samuel. And until next time, thank you all for listening.